June 11th, 1944. The Normandy countryside. The air smells of crushed apples, damp earth, and burning diesel. Inside a British Sherman tank, the world is a claustrophobic nightmare of noise and heat. The commander stands in the cupola, staring through his binoculars at a shape in the distance. It is a blocky, angular silhouette sitting motionless at the edge of a tree line. It is a Panzerkampfwagen 6, a Tiger. The British crew knows the math. They know it in their bones. The Tiger has 100 millimeters of hardened steel on its front. The Sherman has a 75 millimeter gun that fires a shell traveling at a leisurely 2,000 feet per second. The order is given. Fire! The Sherman rocks back. The shell screams across the field. It strikes the Tiger's frontal plate dead center. Clang! It is the most demoralizing sound in warfare. The sound of a sledgehammer hitting an anvil. The shell doesn't penetrate. It shatters. It bounces off the German steel and ricochets into the sky, leaving nothing but a scratch on the paint. Slowly, terrifyingly, the Tiger's turret begins to rotate. The long 88mm gun traverses toward the Sherman. The British crew is frantic. Load! Fire again. They fire again. Clang. They are throwing pebbles at a fortress. The Tiger fires once. There is no bounce. There is only a catastrophic explosion as the 88mm shell tears through the Sherman, igniting the ammunition and fuel. This scene played out hundreds of times. It was the Tiger panic. The Allies had the numbers, but the Germans had the physics. The Allies needed a miracle. They needed a weapon that didn't just hit hard. They needed a weapon that could punch a hole through the toughest steel ever rolled by German industry. They needed a silver bullet. To understand the silver bullet, we must leave the muddy fields of France and go back to a desperate moment in 1940, days before the fall of Paris. The technology that would eventually kill the Tiger tank did not begin in a British laboratory. It began in the mind of a French engineer working for the Edgar Brandt Company. In the 1930s, military engineers were hitting a wall. To penetrate thicker armor, you needed a bigger gun, but a bigger gun meant a heavier tank. If you made the gun too big, the tank became too heavy to move. It was a paradox. The French engineers had a radical idea. What if you didn't need a bigger shell? What if you just needed a faster one? They theorized that penetration wasn't about the size of the explosion. It was about kinetic energy. The formula for kinetic energy is simple: 1/2 mass times velocity squared. That meant that if you doubled the weight of the shell, you doubled the energy. But if you doubled the speed, you quadrupled the energy. Speed was the key. Speed was the killer. But how do you make a shell go faster? You make it lighter. But if you make it lighter, it's smaller, and it won't fit in the gun barrel. The gas will escape around the sides, and the shell will flop out like a cork. The French solution was the sabot, the French word for a wooden shoe or clog. They designed a small, dense projectile, a dart, and wrapped it in a lightweight shoe or sabot that fit the width of the gun barrel. The idea was that the sabot would catch the gas, push the dart out at incredible speed, and then fall away, leaving the dart to fly to the target. It was a brilliant concept, but before they could perfect it, the Wehrmacht crossed the Maginot Line. As German tanks rolled toward Paris, a team of French engineers frantically packed their blueprints and prototypes into suitcases. They fled to the coast, boarding one of the last evacuation ships to England. They were leaving their country behind, but they were carrying a seed of technology that would one day liberate it. 1941. The Armament Research Department, ARD, in Kent, England. The French blueprints land on the desks of two British researchers, Permutter and Koppok. These men are not soldiers. They are mathematicians, metallurgists, and ballistics experts. They are the wizards of the backroom. They look at the French sabot concept and realize two things. First, it is brilliant. Second, it doesn't work. The problem is the separation. In theory, The sabot, the shoe, is supposed to fall away cleanly the moment the shell leaves the gun. In practice, it's a disaster. If the sabot stays attached for a fraction of a second too long on one side, it acts like a rudder. It pulls the projectile off course. The shell tumbles. It hits the ground. It flies sideways. It is useless. Permutter and Koppok spend 3 years obsessed with this problem. They are trying to solve a puzzle of aerodynamics that happens in milliseconds, moving at 3 times the speed of sound. They realize they need a material that is incredibly heavy and hard for the penetrator dart. Steel is too soft. It will shatter against a tiger's hide. They turn to tungsten carbide, a material so dense and hard it is used to machine other metals. It is scarce, expensive, and brittle, but it is the only thing that will work. They design a dart of tungsten, less than 2 inches wide. It looks like a large arrow. Then they tackle the sabot. They design a pot or cup made of aluminum alloy. It looks like a flower pot holding the dart. They score the sides of the pot so that when it hits the air resistance outside the barrel, the pot will peel back like the petals of a blooming flower. They call it APDS, Armour-Piercing Discarding Sabot. When they test it, the results are terrifying. A standard 17-pounder shell leaves the barrel at 2,900 feet per second. The APDS round screams out at 3,950 feet per second. It is hypersonic. It moves so fast that the human eye cannot track the tracer. It arrives at the target before the sound of the gun firing. When this tungsten dart hits a steel plate in testing, it doesn't just penetrate, it flows. The kinetic energy is so high that the steel armor behaves like a liquid. The dart punches through, spraying a fountain of molten metal into the tank. Permutter and Koppok have done it. They have created a projectile that can turn a tiger tank into a tomb from a mile away. But they have also created a problem. The year is 1943. The invasion of Europe is looming. The British Army needs this ammunition now. But on the test ranges, a dark secret about the silver bullet is emerging. It is powerful, yes, but it is wild. The separation of the sabot petals is violent. Even with Permutter and Koppok's refinements, the separation isn't always symmetrical. Sometimes, a piece of the aluminum casing clings to the dart for a microsecond too long. That microsecond is enough to induce a yaw, a wobble. At 500 yards, the wobble doesn't matter much, but at 1,000 yards, at 2,000 yards, the shell might veer 5 feet to the left. It might dive into the dirt. The British High Command holds a firing trial. They set up a target the size of a Panther tank turret. They fire standard solid-shot ammunition. The accuracy is excellent, over 90% hits at 1,000 yards. Then they load the silver bullets. They fire. The results are sobering. The accuracy drops to 57%. Nearly half the shots miss the target completely. The generals are faced with a dilemma. They have a weapon that can kill anything, but only hits half the time. Do they issue it? The decision is made. The tiger threat is too great to ignore. Even an inaccurate weapon is better than a weapon that bounces. They authorize mass production, but they attach a warning. This is not for every shot. This is for emergencies. This is the silver bullet you keep in your pocket for the werewolf. The silver bullet needs a gun to fire it. And not just any gun. It needs the 17-pounder. The 17-pounder is a beast of a weapon. It has a barrel that is 15 feet long. The breech block is the size of a typewriter. The recoil is powerful enough to break a man's collarbone if he stands in the wrong place. It was designed as a towed anti-tank gun to be pulled by a truck. No one ever intended to put it inside a tank. It was simply too big. But another engineer, William Kilbourne at Vickers, refused to accept too big. He looked at the American Sherman tank, the workhorse of the Allied armies, and decided he was going to jam this massive gun into its turret. Physics be damned. Kilbourne turned the recoil mechanism sideways. He cut a hole in the back of the turret and welded an armoured box onto it to allow the gun to recoil. He removed the assistant driver's seat to make room for the massive shells. The result was the Sherman Firefly. It was a Franken tank. It was cramped. It was uncomfortable. The muzzle blast was so bright it blinded the crew. When it fired, flames shot 6 feet out of the barrel. But it was the only tank in the Allied inventory that could carry the silver bullet. By May 1944, the Fireflies are arriving in the assembly areas. The crews are briefed. They are told they are priority targets. They are told that the Germans will hunt them specifically. And then they are given the boxes. Heavy wooden crates stamped with APDS. The crews pry them open. Inside, they see the strange-looking rounds. They don't look like normal shells. They look like black tubes with a funny-looking nose. June 1944. D-Day has succeeded, but the battle for Normandy has bogged down. The Allies are stuck in the bocage, a nightmare landscape of high hedgerows and sunken lanes. It is sniper country, and the German panzers are waiting. For the first few weeks, the silver bullet is a rumour. The supply is scarce. A Firefly might carry 77 rounds of ammunition, but only 4 or 6 of them are APDS. The rest are standard solid shot. The crews hoard them. They treat them like gold. Then the encounters begin. A British column is moving near Caen. A Tiger one emerges from a barn 1,500 yards away. It is well beyond the effective range of a standard Sherman. The Tiger commander is confident. He stops to aim, knowing he has time. In the lead Firefly, the commander makes a split-second decision. Sabot up, load Sabot. The loader, sweating in the cramped turret, reaches into the special rack. He hefts the heavy APDS round. He shoves it into the breech. Clack. Up! The gunner peers through the sight. The Tiger looks small at this distance. He knows about the wobble. He knows he might miss. He aims for the centre of mass. Fire! The 17-pounder roars. The muzzle flash lights up the hedgerow. The sabot petals peel away in a violent cloud of aluminum confetti. The tungsten dart screams across the valley at Mach 3. The German crew never hears the shot. The dart strikes the Tiger's glacis plate. It doesn't knock. It enters. The friction is so intense that the tungsten turns white hot. It punches through the engine block, through the firewall, through the ammunition rack. The Tiger shudders. A second later, a column of flame erupts from the commander's hatch. The British crew stares in silence. They have just done the impossible. They have killed a Tiger from a mile away. The silver bullet works. Word spreads fast, not just among the British, but among the Germans. German intelligence officers begin to examine the wrecks of their tanks. They are confused. They find holes that are too small to be from a large caliber gun, but too deep to be from anything else. They find entry wounds that look like someone took a laser to the steel. A report goes up to the German High Command. The Tommy has a new ammunition. It ignores armour. The psychological impact is devastating. Before, a Tiger crew felt safe as long as they kept their front armour pointed at the enemy. Now, there is no safe angle. There is no safe distance. The order goes out to all panzer divisions. Achtung! Look for the tanks with the long barrels. They are the priority. Kill them first. The Firefly crews realize they are being hunted. They paint the barrels of their guns to make them look shorter. They cover the muzzle brakes with netting. They are trying to hide the fact that they are carrying the silver bullet. But when the engagement starts, the disguise drops. August 1944. Operation Totalize. The British and Canadians are pushing south to close the Falaise Gap. Standing in their way is the 12th SS Panzer Division, and leading the Tigers is a man who has become a myth. Michael Wittmann, the Black Baron. Wittmann is the deadliest tank ace of the war. He is credited with destroying 138 tanks. He is arrogant, aggressive, and believes himself to be invincible. He rides in a Tiger number 007. On August 8th, near the village of Gaumesnil, Wittmann leads a counterattack. He is rolling across an open field, flanked by other Tigers. He expects to steamroll the British forces just as he did at Villers-Bocage 2 months earlier. He sees the British tanks in the distance, Shermans. He assumes they are harmless Ronsons. He does not know that hidden in the orchard of a nearby chateau is a single firefly from the Northamptonshire Yeomanry. The gunner is Trooper Joe Ekins. He is a shoemaker from a small town in England. He has never killed a man. This is his first combat engagement. Ekins watches the Tigers advance. He is nervous. The range is 800 yards. At this range, Ekins doesn't need the silver bullet. The standard 17-pounder shell is lethal enough at close range. But it is the existence of the 17-pounder, the gun built to fire the silver bullet, that makes this encounter possible. Ekins fires. The first Tiger explodes. Whitman realizes he is under attack, but he can't see the enemy. He spins his turret, searching. Ekins fires again. The second Tiger burns. Now, only Whitman is left. The Black Baron, the Invincible. He is driving blindly across the field, exposing his flank. Ekins lines up the shot. He breathes out. He fires. The shell strikes Whitman's Tiger. It punches through the upper hull. The ammunition ignites. The explosion is so violent it blows the 11-ton turret completely off the hull, flipping it into the air like a coin. In 12 minutes, the shoemaker Joe Ekins has destroyed 3 Tigers and killed the greatest ace of the Third Reich. While Ekins likely used standard ammunition at that specific range, the message was clear. The Tiger was no longer the king. The technology gap had closed. The silver bullet and the gun that fired it had ended the reign of terror. As the war moved into Germany in 1945, the Nazis unleashed their final monsters, the Tiger II, or King Tiger. This tank was a behemoth. It weighed 70 tons. It had sloped armour that was virtually impenetrable to almost every gun in the Allied arsenal. Even the standard 17-pounder rounds bounced off its front. This was the moment the silver bullet was truly made for. Reports from the Rhineland describe encounters where fireflies faced down King Tigers. The range was long. The standard shells were useless. The firefly commanders called for sabot. These shots were gambles. The crews knew the accuracy issues. They knew the sabot might separate poorly and send the dart into the dirt. But they had no choice. In one documented encounter, a firefly engaged a King Tiger at 1,200 yards. The gunner loaded APDS. He fired. The tungsten dart struck the King Tiger's turret face. It was the thickest armour on the tank, 180 millimeters of sloped steel. The dart went straight through. It didn't just penetrate, it shattered the spalling inside, killing the crew and detonating the propellant charges. The King Tiger, the pinnacle of Hitler's heavy armour obsession, was gutted by a projectile smaller than a broomstick. It was the ultimate vindication of Permeter and Kopok's work. They had proven that velocity beats mass. They had proven that a clever rock is better than a big rock. But the victory of the silver bullet was not clean. It came with a cost. Because of the accuracy issues, the wobble, many Firefly crews died trying to use it. There are accounts of gunners firing APDS at Tigers and watching the tracer spiral harmlessly past the target. The German tank, unharmed, would then return fire with lethal precision. The silver bullet was a desperate weapon for a desperate time. It was flawed. It was temperamental. But it gave the Allied crews something more important than penetration statistics. It gave them hope. Before the silver bullet, seeing a Tiger meant running or dying. With the silver bullet, there was a chance, a roll of the dice, a possibility that you could be the giant killer. The war ended in May 1945. The Tigers and King Tigers were dragged off into scrapyards. The Fireflies were retired. But the technology of the silver bullet did not disappear. In fact, it became the future. If you look at a modern main battle tank today, the American M1 Abrams, the British Challenger 2, the German Leopard 2, they do not fire explosive shells at other tanks. They fire APDS, Armour-Piercing Fin-Stabilized Discarding Sabot. They fire tungsten or depleted uranium darts encased in a sabot travelling at hypersonic speeds. The technology that Perlmutter and Kopok struggled with in 1941, the flowerpot sabot, the tungsten core, the separation physics, is now the standard for every army in the world. They solved the accuracy issues by adding fins to the dart, stabilizing it like an arrow. But the concept remains exactly the same. The silver bullet was the ancestor of modern warfare. It was the moment ballistics shifted from the age of the cannonball to the age of the kinetic penetrator. Imagine a field in Normandy today. It is quiet. The hedgerows are overgrown. The rusted hulks of the tanks are gone, moved to museums or melted down. But if you were to dig into the earth, deep into the soil of a farmer's field, you might find something strange. You might find a piece of twisted aluminum. It looks like a petal from a mechanical flower. It is scorched and jagged. It is a piece of a discarding sabot, a relic of the moment when a British crew, terrified and trapped in a metal box, decided to trust in physics and fire the silver bullet. It is a piece of the secret that killed the tiger. November 1944. The air war over Europe has supposedly been won. The Luftwaffe is beaten, its back broken by years of relentless attrition. American bomber streams stretch for miles across the freezing pale blue sky, protected by swarms of Mustang and Thunderbolt fighters that roam like wolves, unchallenged. The Allied pilots believe they own the sky. They believe the war is simply a matter of time, a mopping-up operation against a dying enemy. But then, they see it. A shape that doesn't make sense. It cuts through the drone of the piston engines with a sound that has never been heard in combat before. It is a high-pitched, whistling scream, like the sound of tearing canvas, but amplified 1,000 times. It moves with a terrifying smoothness, lacking the vibration and struggle of a propeller-driven machine. It has no propeller. Its wings are swept back like a shark's fins, aggressive and alien. And it is moving at a speed that defies the known laws of aerial physics. It is the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. It screams past the American escorts at 540 miles per hour. The American pilots react on instinct, slamming their throttles forward, their massive radial engines roaring in protest as they try to give chase. But the gap doesn't close. It widens. The German jet climbs away effortlessly, leaving the propeller-driven fighters gasping in its wake, suspended in the air like statues. In that freezing moment, every Allied pilot realizes a terrifying truth. Their planes, the pinnacle of 1940s engineering, are suddenly obsolete. They are flying relics in a jet-age war. The combat reports hit the desks of American commanders like a bomb. The Germans have a plane that is untouchable. Intelligence officers stare at the blurry gun camera photos in disbelief. If the Nazis can produce these jets in significant numbers, the bomber offensive and the invasion of Germany itself could stall. The entire strategy of the Allied air war relies on air superiority, on the ability to sweep the Luftwaffe from the sky. But you cannot sweep what you cannot catch. The Allies have their own jets in development, the British Meteor and the American P-80, but they are months, maybe years, away from being combat ready in the numbers needed. They need a solution now. They need a plane that can catch a jet. But you cannot build a new plane in a month. You have to use what you have. And what they have is the P-47 Thunderbolt, a plane the British mocked as a flying milk bottle when it first arrived. A plane German pilots laughed at, calling it a pregnant cow because of its bulbous fuselage. A 7-ton monster of a machine that dwarfed the delicate Spitfires and Mi-10-9s. The solution sounds insane. Take this dinosaur, this flying tank, and turn it into a hot rod. Inject its heart with a volatile cocktail of water and alcohol. Boost the engine pressure until it is on the verge of exploding. The goal: to squeeze 2,800 horsepower out of an engine designed for 2,000. to make a propeller spin so fast it breaks the sound barrier, to catch the future by brute forcing the past. This is the story of the P-47M, the 2,800 horsepower gamble. To understand the magnitude of this gamble, you must first understand the machine itself. The P-47 Thunderbolt was never designed to be an interceptor. It was born from a panic in 1940, when the US Army Air Corps looked at the war in Europe and realized their current fighters were useless against the Luftwaffe. The man tasked with saving them was Alexander Krupp, Republic Aviation's Georgian-born chief designer. Krupp was a visionary who didn't believe in the prevailing European philosophy of lightweight, nimble fighters. He didn't care about turning circles or dogfighting in a phone booth. He believed in one thing: power. When the army asked for a high-altitude fighter, Krupp designed a monster. He built the plane around the engine, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, an 18-cylinder radial engine that produced 2,000 horsepower, a figure that was unheard of at the time. To the pilots of the day, used to engines producing half that power, the R2800 was a beast. But power at sea level wasn't enough. To fight at 30,000 feet, where the air is thin and engines suffocate, the Thunderbolt needed to breathe. So Krupp installed a massive turbo supercharger system in the rear fuselage, with complex ducting running the entire length of the plane. It was plumbing on an industrial scale. The result was a plane that weighed 9,900 pounds empty, 65% heavier than its predecessor. It was huge, it was heavy, it was complex. When the prototype rolled out, it shocked everyone. By 1943, this dinosaur had proven itself. It couldn't turn with a Messerschmitt, and it couldn't climb as fast as a Spitfire, but it could dive. God, could it dive? Its massive weight became a weapon. In a dive, the P-47 could reach speeds approaching the sound barrier, falling faster than any German piston fighter could hope to follow. It was an energy fighter: climb high, dive fast, hit hard, and zoom back up using the momentum. But in late 1944, diving wasn't enough. The German jets didn't need gravity to go fast. They had thrust. The P-47 needed to go fast in a straight line. It needed to sprint. The engineering challenge facing Republic Aviation was a problem of simple physics. To go faster, you need more power. To get more power from a piston engine, you need to burn more fuel and air in the same amount of time. To do that, you increase the manifold pressure, the pressure of the fuel-air mixture being forced into the cylinders by the supercharger. You cram more explosive potential into the combustion chamber. But there is a hard physical limit. If the pressure gets too high and the temperature inside the cylinder rises too much, the mixture doesn't burn smoothly. It detonates. It explodes violently and prematurely. This is called knocking, or pre-ignition. In a car, it's a rattle. In a high-performance aircraft engine running at redline, knocking is catastrophic. It acts like a hammer blow to the piston. It will melt the aluminum pistons, shatter the connecting rods, and blow the cylinder heads off in seconds. The engine will literally tear itself apart from the inside out. The R2800 engine was rated for 2,000 horsepower. That was the safe limit established by years of testing. The engineers needed 2,800. They needed a 40% increase in power from the same basic machinery. They were asking the engine to perform impossible feats of endurance. How do you stop the engine from melting under that kind of stress? You have to cool it, but you can't just add more air vents or bigger radiators. That creates drag, which slows you down. You need to cool the fire itself, from the inside. The solution was a technology that felt like alchemy: water methanol injection. Engineers designed a system to spray a mixture of water and alcohol, methanol, directly into the engine's induction system, right into the throat of the carburetor. It worked on the principle of latent heat of vaporization. When the fine mist of water hit the hot intake manifold and the combustion chamber, it instantly flashed into steam. This phase change absorbed a massive amount of heat, instantly chilling the fuel-air charge. The alcohol was there to prevent the water from freezing at the freezing altitudes where the P-47 operated, and to provide an extra kick of anti-detonant fuel. By chilling the mixture, two things happened. First, the air became denser. Cold air is heavier than hot air, meaning they could pack more oxygen into the cylinder. More oxygen meant they could dump in more fuel. Second, and more importantly, the cooling effect stabilized the combustion. It prevented the catastrophic pre-ignition. Because the mixture was cooler, the engineers could crank the manifold pressure to dangerous, unprecedented levels without triggering the deadly knock. It was a war emergency power setting on steroids. A wet setting. When the pilot flipped the switch, the fluid would rush into the engine. The manifold pressure gauge would spike. The engine would go from a deep roar to a high-pitched, tearing scream. The horsepower would jump from 2,000 to 2,800 in a heartbeat. It was like injecting adrenaline directly into the heart of the machine. But there was a catch. There is always a catch in engineering. The consumption was horrific. In normal crews flying back from a mission, a P-47 burned about 100 gallons of high-octane aviation fuel per hour. With the water injection engaged, fighting for its life against a jet, the Thunderbolt became a glutton. It guzzled fuel at a rate of 300 gallons per hour. The fluid tank for the water-methanol mixture was small. It became a flying gas tank with a limited fuse. A pilot engaging the system had minutes, not hours, to win the fight. If he ran out of water while running at high pressure, the engine would detonate instantly. If he ran out of fuel, he was a glider. It was a system built for a sprint, not a marathon. Republic Aviation took this souped-up, hot-rodded engine and built a new variant around it, the P-47M, the Sprint Thunderbolt. They took the standard P-47D airframe and stripped it down. They removed underwing pylons to reduce drag. They refined the aerodynamics. But the most visible change was at the front, where the power met the air. To harness 2,800 horsepower, a standard propeller was useless. A standard prop designed for 2,000 horsepower would simply spin faster and faster without biting the air, losing efficiency to slippage. It would be like a car spinning its tires on ice. They installed the paddle blade propeller, a massive Hamilton standard hydromatic propeller, 13 feet in diameter. These weren't the elegant tapered blades of a Spitfire. These were broad, square-tipped slabs of metal that looked like giant oars. They were designed to grab huge chunks of air and throw them backward with violence. They allowed the engine to transfer that raw, increased horsepower into thrust. But they also created a signature side effect that added to the psychological terror of the machine. The tips of these 13-foot blades, when spinning at full takeoff power or in a high-speed dive, were moving so fast they broke the speed of sound. They went supersonic. This created a continuous sonic boom that radiated outward from the propeller hub. The Germans on the ground called it Donnerschlag, thunderclap. It wasn't the high-pitched whine of a Messerschmitt or the smooth drone of a Mustang. It was a deep, terrifying, metallic roar that vibrated in the chest of anyone standing nearby. It sounded like the sky was being torn apart. It was a sound that announced the arrival of the ultimate piston fighter. The result of all this tinkering, this injection of poison and water, this aerodynamic refinement. The P-47M could reach 470 miles per hour in level flight at 30,000 feet. It was fast. It was the fastest propeller-driven fighter the Army Air Force would ever deploy in numbers. It was fast enough to make the German jet pilots sweat. In early 1945, these new hot rods were deployed to the 56th Fighter Group, the famed Wolf Pack. Their mission was specific, dangerous, and unlike anything they had done before. Hunt the jets. The pilots knew the math. They weren't stupid. Even with 2,800 horsepower, the P-47M was still slower than the Me-262, which could hit 540 miles per hour in a straight line. If the German pilot pushed his throttle and flew straight and level, he would escape. Physics was still on the side of the jet. So the American pilots had to be smarter. They had to be hunters. They couldn't just chase. They had to trap. They studied the intelligence reports on the Me-262. They learned that the early jet engines, the Jumo 004s, were fragile and temperamental. They had poor acceleration at low speeds. The pilots couldn't slam the throttle forward like a piston pilot could. If they did, the jet engine would flame out or catch fire. And most importantly, the jets couldn't turn tight without bleeding off their precious speed. Major George Bostwick, commanding the 63rd Fighter Squadron, developed the tactics. "We catch them when they are vulnerable," Bostwick told his men, on takeoff, on landing, or when they slow down to attack the bombers. The jets had to slow down to line up their shots on the B-17s. That was the window, and the Americans had one other advantage that the jets couldn't match: gravity. The P-47 had always been a diver. It was heavy, dense, and aerodynamic. But the P-47M, with its clean lines and massive weight, fell out of the sky like an anvil dropped from a skyscraper. In a dive, the P-47M could reach speeds approaching 500 miles per hour, flirting with the sound barrier, the controls stiffening as the air turned to concrete. If a P-47M pilot could start above a jet, he could convert that altitude into raw kinetic energy, crashing down on the enemy before the German pilot even checked his mirror. This was the bounce. The ultimate test of man and machine came in March 1945. Major Bostwick was patrolling in his P-47M, scanning the horizon for the elusive Swallows, the German name for the Me-262. The sky was tense. The bomber stream was miles away, a magnet for the jets. Then he saw them, a flight of Me-262s streaking in to attack the heavy bombers. In a standard fighter, this would be the moment to turn away, to accept that you couldn't close the distance. But Bostwick had the water methanol switch. He had the sprint plane. He engaged the system. He felt the kick as the fluid rushed into the cylinders. The 2,800 horsepower kicked in. The engine screamed its high-pitched wail. The paddle blades bit into the thin air, churning it into thrust. Bostwick positioned himself high above the jets, hoarding his potential energy. He watched them line up on the bombers, slowing slightly to aim their cannons. This was the moment. Bostwick rolled his massive fighter inverted and pulled the stick back. The P-47M dropped. The acceleration was violent. The airspeed indicator wound past 450, 470, 500 miles per hour. The airframe shuddered under the stress, but Kartveli's dinosaur was built like a tank. It held together. Bostwick was moving fast enough to catch the future. As he closed the distance, the German pilots likely didn't see him until it was too late. They were relying on their speed for protection, confident that no propeller plane could touch them. They were looking for Mustangs, not this diving monster. Bostwick lined up his sights on a Me-262. He was flying a relic of the piston age, but he was armed with 850 caliber machine guns that poured out a solid stream of lead. He squeezed the trigger. The P-47M shuddered as the guns roared, spewing armor-piercing incendiary rounds. The heavy bullets slammed into the fragile jet. The Me-262 was built for speed, not durability. Its engines were exposed, its fuel tanks vulnerable. Bostwick's combat report was clinical but devastating. He noted that while the jets were faster, they were brittle. The jets are faster, but they can't turn and they can't take punishment, he wrote. One good burst from our battery and they come apart like they're made of paper. He watched as the advanced German technology disintegrated under the brute force of American firepower. Large pieces, including both engines, separated from the fuselage, he reported. The German pilot, trapped in a disintegrating machine, did not escape. Bostwick shot down 2 Me-2 jets in that single month. Other pilots in the Wolfpack added to the tally. It was a vindication of Alexander Kartveli's design philosophy. The Americans hadn't tried to build a delicate high-tech interceptor to match the Germans. They hadn't tried to be elegant. They had taken a heavy, rugged airframe and pushed it beyond its limits with sheer engineering audacity. They proved that a piston engine, pushed to the edge of destruction by water and alcohol, could still kill the technology of the future. The P-47M was the final evolution of the Thunderbolt. It was a machine built for a specific fleeting moment in history, bridging the desperate gap between the propeller age and the jet age. It was a gamble that paid off. The German jets were technological marvels, precursors to the modern age of aviation, but they were few, they were unreliable, and they were flown by men with little training. The P-47s were built by the thousands, fueled by the endless resources of the American industrial machine, and flown by pilots who knew exactly how to use their dinosaurs to hunt. When the war ended just a few months later, the P-47M faded quickly into history. It was scrapped, replaced by the very jets it had hunted, like the P-80 Shooting Star. The era of the piston fighter was over, but for a few critical, freezing months in 1945, the sky belonged to the Sprint Thunderbolt. It was the fastest, loudest, and most terrifying piston fighter ever to fly. It was the sound of a Donnerschlag that announced the end of the Luftwaffe. It was the sound of 2,800 horses screaming in unison, chasing down the future and tearing it apart.